Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Let's take the conversation to the eastern part of the continent. Azimio leader Raila Odinga has announced that he will lead mass action in 14 days if the demands, including lowering cost of living, are not met by President William Ruto's government. He says the withdrawal of subsidies to food and education in the middle of drought and famine was reckless and heartless.
Consequently, the subsidies must be restored and the cost of basic commodities and taxes must come down in the next 14 days. Mr. Odinga also said the electoral deceit must end and that servers must be opened and audited under the auspices of a reputable firm or organization. Failure, of course, to which they shall lead the people to restore the authority and voice. Now, joining us from Kenya in Nairobi this morning is Javas Bigambo. He is a Kenyan political scientist with a tight reputation in political analysis, and of course is here to shed more light and provide updates on this. Thanks for joining us, Javas.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to join you this morning.
All right. I remember we followed through with the Kenyan elections, and when William Ruto was eventually declared winner, there seemed to be, some squabbles, with Raila Odinga, of course, the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, whether they agreed with the elections or not. It's been, the moral of the story has been chaos since William Ruto became president. It doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. What do you think continues to drive Raila Odinga?
Well, first, it is clear from what is happening in Kenya since the time that elections were concluded after the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission declared William Ruto as the validly elected president, and after the Supreme Court of Kenya upheld the declaration of William Ruto as president, it is clear that the issue of political rights are central and rightly upheld in Kenya, and is something that is very much respected. Because if political rights were not respected, then we would see a critical infringement of those rights and trying to constrict the rights to assemble, protest, and even picket, as it's provided for in the Constitution of Kenya through Article 37. But what now continues to take trail right now is that Raila Odinga is adamant that William Ruto won the election. And while I do not want to give it a clear or a crisp historical lens, this having been Raila Odinga's fifth attempt at the presidential contest, he is averse to conceding or appreciating that some other person may have garnered more votes than him, because every election since 1997 that he has been on the ballot, he has not conceded. But nonetheless, the critical issues that Raila Odinga is raising are very important. As a matter of fact, from the time that Kenyans had the new constitution, that's Constitution of Kenya 2010, up to now, the presidential petition in 2013, presidential petition in 2017, and now even the presidential petition in 2022 have been very instrumental in improving the election management processes, because the ventilation on electoral management issues, policies, and laws, and their necessary amendments from the Supreme Court's judgment have been very important in the strengthening of the institutional, legal, and even policy frameworks in election management. And so even right now, we are seeing Raila Odinga making a call for the issue of opening of the servers, as he puts it, so that a clear audit can be done by an independent firm. Now, I think nearly anyone, and having followed elections as a political scientist and as a lawyer, I think I can come to a near conclusion that the Kenyan election is one of the most transparent and open elections. However, much more needs to be done. If at all the access to the servers is something that will ameliorate election management and even scale up transparency and accountability of election management and presidential votes, then let it be done. But the issue as well of calling for protests, which Raila Odinga has given a 14-day ultimatum, is something that may need reflections on the part of the political leaders and at the part of government as well. This is not the first time that Raila Odinga is calling for protests or making a declaration of the same since the election. In November last year, 2022, Raila Odinga had made a threat of leading mass protests, which he postponed to somewhere 7th December. And he postponed again, indicating that parents had made a request that it would interfere with the national examination. And many other factors came into play. I doubt that it may be rational and reasonable to go on with the issue, for instance, of the mass protests after the 14-day ultimatum, because when you look at the manner in which the dollar is acting up against the Kenyan shilling, the other factors, including climate change, that are consequential in matters food security, it may not be possible that the prices of food commodities may come down within the next 14 days. Yesterday, President William Ruto himself, while commissioning a government program, indicated that he would like the opposition to take time and give the government the time necessary for purposes of streamlining government operations and bringing down the cost of living. The government seems to have reconsidered the issue of the fuel subsidies, because when President Ruto took the reins of power, he put aside the fuel subsidies that his predecessor had instituted or put in place. And it seems that they had a consequential effect. And so I think the government is going a bit soft on the issue of fuel subsidies, because that also raises the cost of living, because it affects electricity generation, it affects mobility, it affects industrial works, etc. And so anything that raises taxation or the removal of fuel subsidies on the fuel subsidies has got a domino effect on nearly every product on the Kenyan market.
Right.
And so I think it's a discussion that government, public, and leaders of the opposition at the national level may need to handle with sobriety, without all these frills of getting into actions that may easily unsettle the political apple cart.
You've mentioned a number of things at this point. I mean, you've touched on a number of points. One, you talked about the IEBC, the servers as well, and access to the servers, which William Ruto has interestingly said will not be happening. And anyone who is interested in those results should wait to 2027 general elections. You also touched on the cost of living and the increase in the cost of living. Now, President William Ruto has asked for time. He's even pointed fingers at Raila Odinga, saying that he was a part of the previous administration based on the handshake. He's asked for time, saying that he would ensure that in time these things there'll be some form of balance. So is it fair to maybe say that President William Ruto hasn't been given enough time? Or if we judge from the time he's been in office till now, would we say that the time being spent so far is sufficient for things to have gotten better, for the cost of living to have improved for the people of Kenya?
Well, first, if I were to give it a Hobbesian thought, I would say that when an election is conducted, the people enter into a social contract with the government or those that have been elected. That social contract is subsistent in the period of the election cycle, which is 5 years in the Kenyan situation, going by the Constitution of Kenya. And it is not incumbent on the opposition or any person to dictate what is it and how the government, or for example, a party that is in power, to carry out or conduct the implementation. Because the manifesto being implemented right now is a William Ruto manifesto under the Kenya Kwanza coalition. And it is them who understand it best. And I think within the 5.5 months right now that have lapsed, it may not be wise and rational to indicate that the government has had sufficient time to examine and implement all the commitments that it made, because some of those commitments are long-ranging and may take a year, 2 years, 3 years. Some of them, in fact, may not even take the life of this government. In fact, as a matter of fact, when you do an introspective analysis of manifesto implementation in Kenya since the time of multi-party politics, there is no regime that has implemented even 50% of its manifesto. Not even the government of former President Uhuru Kenyatta. It did not even implement, in fact, not even 45% of its manifesto. No government in Kenya, rather in Africa or even around the world, has ever implemented, in fact, 80% of its manifesto. But I think it is important what Raila Odinga is doing. He has taken up his opposition role with gusto quite effectively, putting the government not just in check, but the government on its toes. In fact, what William Ruto now realizes is that the opposition is not sleeping, Raila Odinga is not sleeping, and he has got to deliver on every mandate that he committed. In fact, I think if the Azimio leadership carries on with the consistency of checking the government and putting it on its toes, then it's possible that the William Ruto administration is likely to go down in history as a performing administration, because it's being checked not just on every pronouncement, but on every project, every allocation, and in fact there is critical scrutiny of budgetary allocations and expenditure. Right now, I'm sure that the next streak of attention on the part of the opposition is how there is an increment in allocation to the office of the president and state house, and then the office of the deputy president. And so I think the opposition and Raila Odinga and Azimio are doing a very wonderful job of keeping the government in check. On the issue of IEBC and opening of the servers, I think it would be very rational and wise not just to be minimalistic and look at the issue of the opening of the servers, but in fact examine the post-election evaluation report by the IEBC, as well as the critical recommendations by the Supreme Court on even how the electronic management and the transmission of results of president need to be done, especially the issue of the separation of the website and the hosting of the IEBC website and the hosting of the portal that manages the transmission of presidential results. These are things that are very important, but may not happen within the next 1 month or 6 months, because even right now, as we are speaking, we do not have IEBC commissioners in office substantively. And the process of recruiting other commissioners is ongoing.
I remember, how all that, played out. But, I also want to talk about what the 14 days ultimatum would look like. In the next 14 days, Kenyans expected to go out and protest alongside Raila Odinga. Do you see that happening? Does he have that level of support to bring thousands of Kenyans out on the streets to protest against the William Ruto government?
Now, the reality of the protests coming to pass is not remote. It is not remote based on a number of grounds. One, that Raila Odinga has got sworn loyalists, so died in the wool loyalists. Secondly, we have got individuals who voted for Azimio and still are reeling with the effect of Raila Odinga having lost the election. And so with that frustration, they will be ready and available to come out when Raila Odinga calls for protests. Thirdly, the issue of the high cost of living. It is an irritant to nearly every person. The cost of living skyrocketed, and the issue of unemployment, the youth bulge, and most of those individuals who are unemployed are likely to be available for that. It will take Raila Odinga to do that. I think it may not take the form of national mass protests that are concurrent, because that, in fact, it will have the effect of stalling the economy. Because for Raila Odinga, I think the interest here is not to stall the economy or frustrate the economy, but to make sure that the economy works for everybody else. And I think between now and those 14 days, so much is likely to happen. Because so far from the pronouncements of the president, I think the government is likely to be in motion to see to it that the issue to do with the cost, say, of electricity, the cost of food, especially the cost of maize flour, are things that maybe are spoken to give the commitment that the cost of living is going to be brought down. And if such things are taken into effect by the government, then it may molten the hearts of the opposition leadership with regard to sticking to the call or the ultimatum of going to or calling the protests and having them materialize.
All right.
But it waits to be seen whether within these 14 days, those protests are going to happen. And I say this, it waits to be seen because Raila Odinga has given ultimatums twice. This is the third. And of the past two ultimatums, none of those has materialized upon the lapse of that time.
All right. Beyond Raila Odinga, excuse me, beyond Raila Odinga threatening a protest in the next 14 days if nothing has happened, we did talk about the protest of some form that happened yesterday, and it was Eric Omondi who was arrested, and he and about 17 of his colleagues have been charged to court for participating in unlawful assembly. As quickly as possible, what is the meaning of this? Does it have any major significance, seeing that this man and some others, have come out to, protest? Do we see that there might be likely repeated incidences? The matter has been adjourned till the 6th of March before we hear what next. But are there other concerns that this might become a pattern even before the 14 days elapses?
Initially, there was the thinking that it is a heightened stroke of genius on the part of Eric Omondi for content creation because of how they costumed themselves, bare-chested and in black pants, going to the parliament buildings. But beyond that, of course, when the security enforcement came in, it took a twist, and now that they have been prosecuted. Now, I think other lenses that can be afforded to the Eric Omondi protests is that Eric Omondi and all those that have been prosecuted and every other person has got a right to assemble, a right to protest, a right to picket. That right is protected by the Constitution of Kenya 2010 under Article 37. But beyond that, I think the other issue that may be a moment of consciousness is that when artists get to involve themselves in critical issues of the economy and the politics, one is that either they are deliberate in their pronouncements and picketing about the high cost of living, or two, it could also be a streak of genius on the part of those who want to use him to steal the limelight from Raila Odinga and Azimio. Because remember that they have not associated themselves with Raila Odinga or Azimio, and they may not want to do that. Remember that Eric Omondi has associated himself in the past with Jimmy Wanjigi, who was supposed to be a presidential candidate, but the IEBC stopped him because of not meriting on the issue of the education certification, as well as the number of persons who had endorsed his bid. And so I think it is political, it is artistic, and it is also a matter of consciousness of the political realities and the times in which we are living.
All right. Pretty interesting there. And of course, thanks very much for helping break down these issues as well as you did. Thank you for your time also. We'd like to speak with you again on a later date. But of course, in the next 14 days, if there is a protest, we of course will be following through. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.